I was gone for what should have been just a few ordinary weeks on a work trip. Nothing unusual, nothing extraordinary. But when I returned, my world tilted on its axis, and a nightmare I hadn't even imagined was waiting for me at the front door. Strangers were living in my house. My locks had been changed. My furniture was gone. Every familiar corner, every object I'd collected over the years was either missing or replaced. The person responsible? None other than HOA Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood. And she hadn't acted to protect the community or even the HOA's balance sheet. No, she'd sold my house, sold it. And the money? Not funneled into communal improvements or shared benefits, but instead used to fund her spoiled son's extravagant vacation. First-class flights, five-star hotels, champagne selfies, all paid for with the roof over my head, the place I had called home. Karen assumed I'd just roll over, that I'd accept her theft silently, as though it were some kind of civic duty. What she didn't know is that I came back armed, not with rage alone, but with evidence and a reveal so shocking it would shatter her smug reign in front of every neighbor foolish enough to worship her self-appointed authority. Let me set the stage for you. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I'd discovered a slice of paradise. Lawns perfectly trimmed, children riding bikes along the sidewalks, neighbors waving with friendly smiles that hid the tiniest flicker of judgment. A picture-perfect postcard suburban dream. I imagined myself finally settling into peace. A quiet patch of grass to grill on weekends, sip a cold beer, and simply exist without the chaos of the outside world intruding. For a time, it was just that. Birds chirping, summer air carrying the scent of barbecues, the gentle hum of suburban life. But, as with all too-good-to-be-true stories, the devil hid in the details. And in my story, the devil's name was Karen. Yes, every neighborhood has a Karen, but mine had struck gold. She wasn't merely cranky or officious about a stray garbage can or a late lawn mowing. No, this was HOA Karen, ruler, dictator, and self-anointed guardian of the streets. Clipboard clutched in her hand, oversized sunglasses shielding her eyes, lips constantly issuing rules no one had ever agreed to. At first, I thought she was eccentric, even mildly entertaining. She'd appear at my door to inspect my grass, a quarter-inch too long, or mail letters demanding I repaint my maroon shutters, which apparently offended her refined aesthetic sense. Then there were the block-wide speeches, where she'd gather neighbors like a general addressing her battalion. "Standards must be maintained," she'd declare, as if a crooked hedge were a threat to national security. People would nod politely, partly out of fear, partly to avoid her wrath. I tried to laugh it off. Every neighborhood had drama, right? I kept my head down, followed the actual HOA rules, and ignored the imaginary ones Karen invented on a whim. But Karen thrived on control. Silence made her uncomfortable. Freedom threatened her. Slowly, her meddling escalated. First, it was the shutters. Then my mailbox, which apparently gleamed too brightly. Even a small ceramic gnome from my niece became an offense to her imaginary community standards. If I didn't know better, I'd swear she stayed awake at night inventing new ways to interfere with my life. Yet even with all of this, I didn't grasp the full picture. Karen wasn't just nosy. She craved power, real power. And when someone like her gets their hands on an HOA budget, the desire to control quickly transforms into greed. The neighborhood whispered about rising dues, yet repairs never seemed to happen. Where was the money going? Karen's explanations were always perfect. Legal fees, maintenance, community improvements. Yet her wardrobe got fresher every season, and her SUV had been upgraded last spring. The red flags were there, waving wildly in hindsight. I admit there were moments I considered standing up sooner, writing to the city, attending board meetings, rallying neighbors, but most people are conflict-averse. Karen retaliated easily. Letters, fines, humiliation. She was like a schoolyard bully, only instead of taking lunch money, she dictated acceptable shades of beige for garage doors. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for this. Selling my house, that crossed every boundary of decency and legality. Weeks before my trip, she had approached me in the driveway, clipboard in hand, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes. "You're going away, aren't you?" she asked, her tone more accusation than question. "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "Just a couple weeks for work." Her lips curled into that thin, triumphant smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "You should notify the HOA when you leave for extended periods, for safety reasons," she said. I chuckled, thinking it harmless nosiness. "I'll keep that in mind, Karen," I said, shaking my head as I drove away, blissfully unaware of the storm she was already brewing. While I was boarding planes, checking into hotels, and assuming my home was safe, Karen was plotting. My absence was her opportunity. She would take what wasn't hers, twist HOA rules to justify it, and walk away with cash to fund her son's luxurious fantasy. Her son, just as entitled as she was, stomping around in designer sneakers, whining about boredom, expecting the world to bow to him. Then came the day I returned. Exhausted but in good spirits. My flight had landed early, and my suitcase rolled smoothly behind me. I imagined the comfort of my own bed, the familiar smell of home, the creak of the floorboards, welcoming me back. But something was off. My stomach tightened as I pulled into the driveway. Two unfamiliar cars blocked the path, a silver SUV and a battered sedan. My curtains weren't the same, they'd been replaced. The welcome mat was gone. Every small detail sent a jolt of unease through me. I reached for my key. It didn't fit. I tried again. Nothing. Panic bubbled in my chest. Then the door swung open. A stranger stood there, a man in his 30s wearing gym shorts holding a coffee mug. He looked at me as if I were the intruder. "Can I help you?" he asked flatly. "Yes," I managed, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You can help by getting out of my house." He raised an eyebrow, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Your house? Buddy, this is our house. We bought it 2 weeks ago." My brain scrambled to keep up. "What are you talking about? I own this house. I've lived here for years." He sighed, clearly accustomed to this reaction. He disappeared inside and returned with a folder, shoving a stack of documents toward me. "Here, proof of purchase. Signed, sealed, and delivered. We bought this place from the HOA. I stared at the documents, the signatures, the stamps, the official-looking seals. It was all there. My name was scribbled at the bottom of one page, except it wasn't my handwriting. It was a forgery. Sloppy, but just good enough to pass. I felt my knees weaken. My suitcase tipped over, forgotten. "This is impossible," I muttered. Behind the man, I saw a woman, his wife, probably carrying groceries into my kitchen. A little girl darted past with a stuffed animal. My walls were covered in their framed photos. My furniture was gone, replaced with theirs. It was like my entire existence had been erased and replaced in a matter of days. I staggered backward onto the porch. My house sold without my knowledge, without my consent. The neighbors had gathered across the street, whispering, staring. One of them, an older man named Jim, shook his head slowly. He muttered just loud enough for me to hear Karen's at it again. "Karen? Of course." I stormed across the street to Jim. "What do you mean, Karen's at it again?" Jim hesitated, glancing at the cluster of onlookers. Finally, he leaned in. "She told everyone you abandoned the property, said you'd moved out for good. She pushed it through the HOA like it was some emergency. Next thing we know, she's bragging about closing a deal." "Closing a deal," I repeated. Jim nodded grimly. "She said the money was going to improve the neighborhood. But then she slipped and mentioned something about her son's trip to Europe. First class, all expenses paid. People laughed, thought she was joking. Guess not. My hands clenched into fists. The blood roared in my ears. This wasn't just meddling. About lawns and shutters. This was theft, fraud. She'd sold my entire life out from under me like it was nothing. I tried calling the police. They showed up, took one look at the paperwork, and shrugged. Looks legal to us. You'll have to take this up in civil court. Civil court? Like I had months to sit around while strangers lived in my home, eating at my table, sleeping in my bed. The worst part, Karen didn't even try to hide. She came strutting down the sidewalk that evening, oversized sunglasses on Starbucks cup in hand, smirk plastered across her face. Well, well, she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Back so soon I thought you'd relocated. Relocated? I shouted. You sold my house. She put a hand to her chest, feigning shock. Oh, don't be dramatic. The community needed stability. Your absence was causing concern. We couldn't just let the place sit there dragging down property values. You forged my signature, I spat. Karen tilted her head, smirk widening. That's a serious accusation. You should be careful what you say. I wanted to lunge at her right there, but I knew she'd love that. She thrived on drama when she was in control. No? I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I bit back my rage, my mind already worrying. As she strutted away, I caught her saying to another neighbor, "Oh, it's fine. The money went to a good cause. My son deserves to see the world." That was it? The truth right out of her mouth. She hadn't just stolen my home. She'd turned it into a piggy bank for her spoiled adult child. Standing there on the sidewalk, homeless, humiliated, seething with fury, I made myself a promise. Karen thought she'd won. She thought she was untouchable, too clever, too powerful with her fake rules and forged papers. But she didn't realize who she was messing with because I wasn't about to roll over and let her get away with it. That day, staring at my house full of strangers and my neighbors shaking their heads, I swore I'd take Karen down. Not just for me, but for everyone she'd bullied, scammed, and trampled on. And the way I was going to do it, I was going to find her weakness. I was going to gather proof, and when the time was right, I'd reveal her entire empire of lies in front of the people she thought she controlled. The storm had officially begun. The first night after I discovered strangers living in my house, I didn't sleep. How could I? My entire life, the roof over my head, the place I thought was safe, had been stolen by a woman with a clipboard and too much free time. I lay awake in a cheap motel room across town, staring at the ceiling and replaying Karen's smug face over and over in my mind. Her smirk, her fake sympathy, the way she dismissed me like I was some child whining about a broken toy. By morning, I'd had enough. I wasn't going to hide in some motel while Karen paraded around the neighborhood sipping lattes and laughing at my expense. If she wanted a confrontation, she was going to get one. So I marched straight to her house. Karen's place was the biggest on the block, of course. Oversized porch, manicured lawn, flower beds arranged like she was auditioning for a gardening magazine. And there she was, sitting like a queen on her throne, a rocking chair on the porch, surrounded by two of her loyal subjects, neighbors, who hung on her every word because they were too scared not to. She had a tall glass of iced tea in one hand, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, and she was laughing at what I didn't know. But the sound of it made my blood boil. I stormed up the path, ignoring the startled looks from her guests. "Karen?" I barked. She didn't flinch. She didn't even stand. She just turned her head slowly toward me, her smirk already locked in place. "Oh, it's you," she said, back again. "I thought you'd be packing your things for, well, wherever people like you go when they don't have homes anymore." Her little entourage chuckled weakly. I clenched my fists. "Cut the act. You sold my house. You forged my signature. You think you can get away with this?" Karen crossed one leg over the other, her sandal dangling lazily. Now, she purred. Let's not use ugly words like forged. The paperwork was expedited. That's all. Someone had to protect the community's property. Values while you were off gallivanting who knows where. Gallivanting, I snapped. I was on a business trip. I told neighbors I'd be gone. I locked my doors. That doesn't give you the right to steal my home. Karen sipped her iced tea unbothered. You left. The house looked abandoned. The HOA has rules about such things. You know, we can't have empty properties attracting undesirables. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Undesirables. That's my house. I'm the homeowner. She leaned forward, finally lowering her glasses just enough for me to see the glint of arrogance in her eyes. We're darling. We're the homeowner. The paperwork says otherwise now. My chest tightened. For a moment, I wanted to scream to rip the papers out of her smug little hands and set them on fire right there on her porch. But I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper would only feed her ego. Where's the money, Karen? I asked coldly. The money from the sale. It was supposed to go into the HOA fund, wasn't it? Karen chuckled. It wasn't even a nervous laugh. It was pure arrogance. Oh, don't worry about the money. It's been put to good use. Her friend on the porch giggled, and I realized with a sick feeling that Karen was about to brag. She couldn't help herself. She leaned back in her chair, smiling like a cat that had swallowed a canary. My son, bless his heart, has been under so much stress. You know how hard it is for young people these days. He needed a break, a vacation. So I thought, why not? He's earned it. I stared at her disbelief, flooding my veins. You mean to tell me you sold my house to pay for your son's vacation? Karen shrugged as though it were the most reasonable thing in the world. He's in Europe right now. First-class flights, 5-star, hotels. The trip of a lifetime. And really, isn't that a better use of funds than some silly maintenance projects? A happy son means a happy mother. And a happy mother makes for a happy neighborhood. I was shaking. My whole body trembled with rage. This wasn't just theft, it was arrogance on a level I'd never encountered before. She'd stolen my home, destroyed my life, and turned it into a gift basket for her spoiled man-child. And now she was bragging about it in front of me. Do you hear yourself? I demanded. You ruined me. You stole my house and you're proud of it. Karen smiled sweetly, setting her glass down on the porch railing. Don't be so dramatic. You'll land on your feet. People like you always do. Besides, what's one little house in the grand scheme of things? Her guests laughed again, but it was nervous laughter this time. They glanced at me, then at her, as if wondering how far she was willing to push. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, so only she could hear. Enjoy your little victory, Karen, because it's the last one you'll ever have. I promise you that. Her smile faltered for just a second, but then she recovered, tilting her head with that same infuriating smirk. Threats won't get you anywhere. Be careful or I'll have to find you for inappropriate behavior at a board member's residence. That was Karen in a nutshell. Arrogant, untouchable, drunk on the little power she'd carved out for herself. But as I turned and walked away, fury pounding in my chest, I knew something she didn't. This wasn't the end. Because while she was sipping iced tea on her porch, laughing about her son's European getaway, I was already planning my counterattack. And unlike her sloppy, arrogant forgery, my plan was going to be airtight. Karen thought she'd buried me. She thought she'd stolen everything I had and left me powerless. But she had no idea that I was about to dig up every dirty secret she'd buried and use it to bring her empire crashing down. Walking away from Karen's porch that day, I felt a mix of rage and clarity. Rage because she had just bragged about stealing my house to bankroll her son's champagne-soaked European getaway. Clarity because in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do to find proof. Ironclad, undeniable proof. See, people like Karen thrive on intimidation. They win because everyone else is too exhausted to fight. She counted on me storming off too defeated to push back. But what she didn't count on was that I've got a stubborn streak. And when you back me into a corner, that's when I come out swinging. The next morning, I headed straight to the county records office. The building smelled like dust and bureaucracy, a mix of old paper and stale coffee. I explained my situation to the clerk at the front desk, who looked at me like I just told her aliens stole my car. Still, she pointed me to the public access terminals. I typed in my property address, heart pounding. Sure enough, there it was, the sale record. The buyers' names matched the strangers living in my house. The signature at the bottom, supposedly mine, except it wasn't. My signature curves up at the end. This one dipped down. Sloppy. A forgery so bad it almost insulted me. I printed everything. Deed transfer sale, authorization, notary stamp, the whole shebang. It was all legal, at least on the surface. But the devil was in the details. And I was going to dig deeper. Next, I checked the HOA's financial filings. That took a little more work. A few polite but persistent requests to the HOA treasurer, who clearly didn't want to be involved. She was a timid woman named Susan who lived 2 streets over. When I asked about the sale money, her eyes darted around like she was afraid Karen might pop out of a hedge. Don't know, she stammered. Karen handles the funds. She said it was for community improvements. Community improvements? I asked, like what Susan fiddled with her glasses. New signage, maybe landscaping? She shrugged helplessly. I never saw invoices. That was all I needed to hear. Back at the records office, I dug into bank statements tied to the HOA account. That's when the picture became clear. Transfers, big ones, money funneled out of the HOA account into a personal account under Karen's name. From there, the trail was almost comical. Wire transfers to luxury airlines, payments to 5-star hotels, charges from European tour companies. She hadn't even tried to hide it. It was like following breadcrumbs through the forest. Each transaction painted the story my house had been sold. The money pocketed and then blown on Karen's spoiled son's eat-love adventure across Europe, Rome, Paris, Amsterdam. The kid was living like royalty while I was holed up in a motel eating takeout. But documents weren't enough. Karen was slippery. If I wanted to take her down, I needed more something that would slam the door shut on any of her excuses. That's when I got lucky. One evening, as I walked the neighborhood to clear my head, a neighbor, I barely knew, a younger guy named Marcus, jogged up beside me. He glanced around nervously before speaking. "I heard what happened to your place," he said quietly. "I thought you should know. Karen's been bragging." "Bragging?" I asked. My voice sharp. He nodded. "Yeah. At the last HOA board meeting. She was laughing about how easy it was. Said, 'You were clueless. Told everyone the money was going to give Herson. The trip of a lifetime.' Half the room clapped. The other half looked sick. But nobody wanted to cross her. Mr. Mac twisted, but I kept my face steady. 'You wouldn't happen to have proof of that, would you?' Marcus grinned and pulled out his phone. 'Oh, I do. I record the meetings just in case.' And there it was. Crystal clear audio of Karen's voice dripping with smugness. Of course, I sold the house. He left it sitting there bringing down our property values. And why not? My son deserves to see the world. First-class 5-star hotels. He'll be living like he should. And honestly, if our HOA funds can help with that, isn't that a community investment?" I nearly laughed. She'd handed me the rope she'd hang herself with, but I wasn't done. I needed her overconfidence to bury her completely. The next week, I quietly gathered every scrap of evidence. The forged signature samples, the bank transfers, the HOA financial gaps, the audio recording, even a few emails Karen had foolishly sent boasting to her inner circle about how visionary she was for repurposing abandoned assets. The more I found, the more surreal it became. She didn't just break the rules, she obliterated them. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't an accident. It was greed. Pure and simple, dressed up in HOA jargon. I started to feel something strange. Excitement. The despair I'd felt when I first saw strangers in my house was fading. In its place, a cold, sharp determination was taking root. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought a forged signature and a smug speech would be enough to shut me down. But she had underestimated me badly. By the time I was done, I had a dossier so thick it could have doubled as a door's stop. Everything labeled, tabbed, and highlighted. If this were a movie, this was the montage where the underdog gathers all the tools to finally strike back. And trust. Me, I was ready to strike. But I wasn't going to do it quietly. No, that wouldn't be satisfying enough. Karen needed to be exposed, not just in court, but in front of the very people she lorded over. She needed to be stripped of her power in the one place she felt most invincible, the HOA, meeting her personal stage. So, I waited patiently while she strutted around bragging about her son's Instagram-worthy vacation. I was planning her downfall. Every time she sipped iced tea on her porch, I imagined the look on her face when the truth came crashing down. And soon that day would come because I had all the proof I needed. And when I dropped it in front of the entire neighborhood, Karen's little kingdom would crumble. I had everything I needed. Paperwork, financial records, recordings, a case so tight even Karen's smug grin couldn't wiggle through the cracks. But evidence on its own wasn't enough for me. No, I wanted her to feel the walls close in. I wanted her to know that her empire, her little thief, she lorded over with a clipboard and a fake smile, was about to collapse. And the stage for that collapse, the one place she felt most powerful, the HOA board meeting. For weeks, I stayed quiet. That was the hardest part. Every time I saw Karen strutting around the neighborhood with her sunglasses and Starbucks cup, gossiping about who left their trash bins out an extra hour, my blood boiled, but I didn't let it show. I nodded politely when she threw her barbed comments. I pretended I was still licking my wounds, a beaten man with nowhere to go. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was tightening the noose. First, I called in a favor from an attorney friend of mine. He reviewed every document I'd collected, highlighting the forgery and the fraudulent transactions. "This isn't just civil," he said, with a grin. "This is criminal. If she thinks she's clever, she's about to learn what handcuffs feel like." Then I spoke to neighbors carefully. Not everyone, just the ones I trusted. The people who had complained quietly for years, but never dared to challenge her. I showed them snippets of the evidence, the forged signature, the bank transfers, the recording of Karen bragging about sending her son to Europe on HOA money. Their jaws dropped. One woman actually gasped, covering her mouth like she'd just witnessed a car crash. "She really said that," she whispered. "Oh, she said it," I replied. "And at the next meeting, she's going to say a whole lot more." Word spread quietly but effectively. By the time the meeting rolled around, the anticipation was thick enough to taste. People who hadn't shown up to an HOA gathering in years suddenly had an excuse to attend. I knew Karen would love the turnout, mistaking it for admiration. That was the beauty of it. She was about to walk right into her own downfall, grinning all the way. The night of the meeting, I arrived early. The community hall was small, just a converted room in the clubhouse, but it was packed. Folding chairs scraped across the linoleum floor as neighbors filed in murmuring amongst themselves. Karen was already there, of course, perched at the head of the table like a queen at court. She wore a blazer, 2 sizes too flashy for the occasion, pearls around her neck, and that ever-present smirk. "Welcome, everyone," she announced, her voice syrupy, sweet, but sharp enough to cut glass. "It's wonderful to see such a turnout. Clearly, you all care deeply about our community's future." I almost laughed. If only she knew why they were really there. She launched into her usual routine, talking about lawn maintenance, mailboxes, the importance of uniformity, and Christmas decorations. The audience nodded politely, though I could see the impatience in their eyes. They weren't here for gnomes and grass. They were here for blood. Finally, Karen segued into her favorite topic herself. As you all know, she said, I've made certain executive decisions recently to protect our neighborhood's property values. Some people question my methods, but let me assure you, everything I do is for the greater good. Sacrifices must be made to maintain excellence. I swear she puffed up like a peacock. She thought she had the room eating out of her hand. That was my cue. I stood holding the thick folder of documents in my hand. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing every eye in the room. Karen paused mid-sentence, her smirk faltering just slightly. Yes, she asked, her tone condescending. Do you have something, Toad? Oh, I do, I said, my voice steady. In fact, I think the entire neighborhood deserves to hear it. The room buzzed. Karen leaned back in her chair, feigning boredom. Go on then, she said. Enlighten us, and that's when I began laying out the trap. First, I held up the deed transfer paperwork. This, I said, is their court of my house being sold while I was out of town. You all know me. You know I didn't abandon my home. Yet, somehow, this signature says I authorized the sale. Except I flipped to another page where I'd written my real signature. This isn't mine. It's a forgery. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People leaned forward, squinting. Karen waved her hand dismissively. Forgery, please. Maybe your memoir is failing. You're not as young as you used to be. I smiled. Nice try. But that's just the beginning. Next, I pulled out the bank statements. Here are the HOA financial records. Notice the large transfers from the HOA account directly into Karen's personal account. From there, money was wired to airlines, hotels, and travel agencies. The murmurs grew louder. Someone shouted, Is that true? Another voice. My dues paid for this? Karen's face tightened. Those are standard disbursements, she snapped. Necessary expenses for community management. That's when I pressed play on my phone. The recording of Karen's voice filled the room. Of course, I sold the house. He left it sitting there, bringing down our property values. And why not? My son deserves. Tozy the world. First-class 5-star hotels. He'll be living like he should. And honestly, if our HOA funds can help with that, isn't that a community investment? The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, even laughter. Karen's smirk evaporated, replaced by a shade of pale I'd never seen on her before. Fake? She screeched. That's fake. But it was too late. The trap had sprung. The neighbors she'd bullied for years were now shouting her down, demanding answers. The timid ones suddenly found their voices. Even her loyal lapdogs looked uneasy, inching their chairs away from her like she was contagious. I stood tall, watching her squirm. You wanted to talk about sacrifices, Karen? Well, here's yours. Your reign is over. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and I wasn't done yet because the real reveal, the one that would end her completely, was still to come. If you've ever watched a magician get caught mid-trick, you know the look that flashes across their face. That split second when they realize the audience has seen the strings, the mirrors, the sleight of hand. That's exactly what Karen looked like as my recording played on loop in that cramped HOA meeting room. Her carefully crafted image queen of the cul-de-sac guardian of neighborhood values shattered with every word of Heron's smug voice echoing back at her. The neighbors weren't whispering anymore. They were yelling. You used our money for your kids. Vacation? One woman shouted, jabbing a finger in Karen's direction. All those fines you handed out, were they just to pay for his hotel suite? Another demanded. Karen raised her hands, palms out, like she was calming a crowd of rowdy protesters. Everyone, please calm down. This is being taken out of context. That recording was doctored. I cut her off. Doctored, really? Because I also have copies of the bank transfers. Want to see where the money went? Air France, Hilton Hotels, a boutique clothing store in Milan. In case anyone's wondering how. Your dues were really spent. I held up the printed statements like a preacher waving a Bible. The crowd surged forward, hungry for the details. Karen's pearls rattled as she gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. One of her loyal followers, a nervous man named Craig, tried to intervene. Now hold on, let's not jump to conclusions. But the crowd turned on him just as fast. You knew about this, didn't you? Someone accused. Craig stammered, stuttered, and finally sank back into his chair, sweating. Karen's empire was crumbling in real time. And I wasn't finished. I pulled out one last sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward her. This is a notarized statement from the county clerk. The signature on my deed transfer verified as a forgery. The notary listed on this document retired 5 years ago, which means, Karen, you didn't just misuse HOA funds, you committed fraud, and that's a felony. The room went dead silent for a moment. Then, like a dam breaking, the shouting started again, louder, angrier, unstoppable. Fraud? She stole from us, called the cops. Karen's face drained of color. She looked around the room for support, but all she found were glares and folded arms. Even her closest allies were slipping away, unwilling to go down with her sinking ship. She tried one last desperate tactic. She stood slamming her hands on the table. You don't understand. I did this for the community. Property values would have plummeted if that house sat empty. I sacrificed for all of you. Her voice cracked. The T words sounded pathetic, hollow. I leaned in my voice, calm, but sharp as a knife. No, Karen, you didn't sacrifice. You stole and you bragged about it. You thought nobody would stand up to you, but here we are, as if on cue. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen and couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. It was a message from Marcus, the neighbor who'd given me the recording. He just forwarded me a screenshot. Karen's son, her golden boy, had posted a photo on social media. He was standing in front of a luxury hotel in Paris, arms spread wide, captioned, "Thanks, Mom, for the best vacation ever. HOA pays better than I thought." I held up my phone for the entire room to see. Gasps turned into laughter, the bitter mocking kind. Karen lunged toward me, screeching, "That's private. That doesn't mean anything, but it meant everything." Her son had exposed her with just one careless post. The neighbors didn't just see her as corrupt anymore. They saw her as pathetic, desperate to please a spoiled man, child who didn't even know enough to keep quiet. The police were called right there in the middle of the meeting. 2 officers arrived within minutes, summoned by a dozen frantic calls from angry residents. Karen tried to smooth her hair, adjust her pearls, and talk her way out of it. "This is a misunderstanding," she babbled. "I'm the president of this HOA. I have rights." One officer cut her off. "Ma'am, you're under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. You'll need to come with us." The sight of Karen being led out in handcuffs was something I'll never forget. The woman who once strutted around with a clipboard, finding people for crooked mailboxes, was now stumbling toward a police cruiser, shouting about her rights while neighbors filmed on their phones. And as if fate wanted to twist the knife, another message came through to Marcus's phone, which he quickly showed me. Karen's son had just tweeted, yes. Tweeted that his dream vacation was ruined because his credit cards had been frozen. He was stranded in Europe, whining to his followers about unfair banking practices. The room erupted in laughter, bitter, joyous laughter, years of pent-up resentment pouring out all at once. I didn't join in right away. I just stood there watching Karen's empire collapse in slow motion, watching the queen of the cul-de-sac become the punchline of her own story. That was the shocking reveal. Not just that she was guilty, not just that she was caught, but that in the end she was nothing more than a fraud, exposed, humiliated, powerless. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer, like we'd all been living under a storm cloud and someone had finally blown it away. But for me, the story wasn't over yet, because as satisfying as it was to watch Karen in handcuffs, I still had to rebuild. I still had to reclaim what was rightfully mine. And that part of the story, the aftermath, would prove just as important. Watching Karen being shoved into the back of that police cruiser was one of the most surreal moments of my life. The woman, who once strutted around with her clipboard like she was the President of the United States, was now whining about procedures and due process as neighbors filmed her downfall for posterity. If humiliation were an Olympic sport, Karen had just broken the world record. But let me be clear, my problems didn't magically disappear with the click of those handcuffs. My house was still technically in someone else's name. The HOA was a financial mess, and I had to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was the rightful owner. That's where the evidence I'd collected came in. My attorney filed everything with the county. The forged signature, the notary who hadn't worked in years, the bank records showing money funneled to Karen's personal accounts. The county clerk's office moved faster than I thought possible, perhaps spurred by the media attention. Because, yes, by then the story had leaked. A local reporter showed up on my street within days, sniffing around for the scoop about the HOA president arrested for selling a neighbor's house. The headline practically wrote itself. While the legal system churned away, something remarkable happened in the neighborhood. For the first time, people weren't afraid to speak up. The timid neighbors who once cowed under Karen's glare now stopped me in the street to share their own horror stories. She fined me $200 because my recycling bin was visible from the road, one man confessed. She threatened to sue me over my Christmas lights, another said. She told me I couldn't park my own car in my driveway overnight, a woman added, shaking her head. It was like everyone had been living under a dictatorship and suddenly realized the tyrant had no power anymore. The laughter was freer, the conversations longer. People started helping one another again without fear of Karen swooping in with her clipboard. As for Karen's son, the poetic justice, there was too rich. His European vacation ended abruptly when his cards were frozen. Social media posts showed him stranded in an airport lounge, whining about how unfair it was. He begged for money online only to be roasted in the comments. The internet has no mercy, and he quickly became a meme. HOA Karen's kid learns life isn't first class. Meanwhile, the legal wheels kept turning. Within weeks, the forged sale was overturned. My deed reinstated. The buyers who had moved into my home, they weren't happy, but thankfully they weren't malicious. They demanded restitution, of course, but since their money had gone directly to Karen, they took their grievances to the court system. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. When I walked back into my house for the first time after reclaiming it, I nearly cried. It was bare, stripped of most of my furniture, but it was mine again. My walls, my floors, my roof. The smell was different, but it didn't matter. I was home. Karen, meanwhile, faced the music. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The list of charges stacked up higher than her ego. Her court appearances drew crowds. Neighbors who once feared her now showed up to watch her squirm, under oath. Reporters jotted down every detail as she tried to spin herself as a misunderstood community servant, but the evidence was overwhelming and the jury didn't buy it. The sentence, enough years behind bars to make sure she wouldn't be terrorizing. Another cul-de-sac anytime soon. The HOA itself had to be rebuilt from scratch. A new board was elected, actual decent people who cared about potholes and playground maintenance, not controlling the shade of your shutters. I was asked if I wanted to run, but I declined. I'd had enough HOA drama for a lifetime. In the end, justice wasn't just about getting my house back. It was about restoring balance. It was about showing that no matter how smug or powerful someone seems, they're not untouchable. And as for me, well, I sleep a little better now. My house feels safer, not because of locks or alarms, but because I know the monster who haunted our neighborhood is gone. When I sit on my porch, now beer in hand, I sometimes chuckle. I think about how Karen once lectured me about my offensive lawn gnome and how that same woman now has a prison number instead of a clipboard. Life has a funny way of settling scores. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's this: silence enables bullies. For years, we all let Karen push us around. We shrugged, we paid the fines, we muttered under our breath, but we didn't fight back. And because of that, she grew bolder, moving from petty complaints about lawns to outright fraud that nearly cost me everything. Bullies thrive on fear and complacency. They bank on the idea that you'll be too tired, too intimidated, or too polite to stand up to them. But once you do, once you shine a light on their lies and hold them accountable, their power evaporates. I also learned the importance of resilience. Losing my home, even temporarily, was devastating. But instead of giving up, I gathered evidence, built allies, and fought back. Justice didn't come overnight, but it did come because I refused to let Karen's arrogance define my future. So if you're dealing with your own Karen, whether it's in an HOA at work or even within your family, don't let them steamroll you. Document everything, stand firm, and remember that even the loudest bully can be silenced with the truth. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a Karen in your life? How did you deal with it? Drop your stories in the comments and don't forget to subscribe because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens.